Welcome to Don't Encourage Us, the show where we talk about the big ideas behind fiction projects of all different kinds. Books, movies, TV shows, video games, nothing's off limits. I'm your host, Pat Stump, and I'm here with my co-host, Pete Wirtz. How you doing today, Pete?
Doing great as always.
Today we're discussing Fallout, the hit series on the soon-to-be overrun by commercials streaming network Amazon Prime. But first, what's been on your list this week?
This week, I started watching a show called The Killing. It was a detective crime thriller from, where is it? It's from Denmark. It's by the same guy that did The Chestnut Man. I don't know if you've heard of that one. That was a big hit on Netflix, so I just started that. It's about a detective following the murder case in a high school, and it's all linked to this political intrigue. It's really complex and really well put together. I really like it.
Interesting.
And I know they did an American remake too.
Yeah, it sounded familiar, but I didn't recall that it was from Denmark. So I do think the one I saw listed was the American one.
Yeah, it's really well done. It was from 2007. And it was a really big hit
throwback.
There. Yeah, throwback. You know, there are parts of it that seem a little bit dated now, but it seems to be like one of the original, let's say like the fonts they use, kind of the way they do the recaps in the beginning of every episode. It's a little cheesy. Like the music is a little bit cheesy and off.
Sure.
But so you can tell that it's like an older series. It's not as slick as like some of the newer crime dramas from like Scandinavia. But you can tell it's kind of like the origin of it, of that particular genre that's become so popular.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting observation. It seems to me that it used to be when I watched foreign TV series, streaming or online or wherever I saw them, they always seemed a little dated, right? Even if they were made that year, they were just sort of behind the current trends in international TV or US TV or however you want to think of it. But now that I think about it, in the last decade, that's really been less and less the case. Like if it's a relatively new production, it feels the same. I'm thinking specifically of like a lot of Korean shows, which I happen to have seen. Like Kingdom, I think was a great one where even though it was made like that year, made in Korea, it felt very much like an American level production. Not to hold up America as like the highest level, but you know what I mean? That kind of polish and money. And I guess that's the streaming influence. What do you think?
I think you're right. I think because these streamers are starting to really understand that these foreign series can be such mega hits globally for them, and they can pick them up at just a cheaper cost.
Right.
And a lot of it has to do with the cost of the production being lower. So I think they can invest a lot more in, let's say, instead of paying actors enormous salaries because they're huge stars, they can invest more on like the development of like the production itself, the lighting, the best cinematographers, the best crew, in order to make it all look so polished and high end. But I've noticed that too on a lot of international series, like series that are coming out of Spain, Scandinavia, even a lot that are coming out of Eastern Europe. They look really, really polished. And you can't really tell if you were just to take a frame from one of those series and compare it to a really high-end production in America. You just can't tell. It's almost that they've standardized the quality overall because it's so valuable to them now. I think before you could just get away with, production quality is not so bad. It doesn't really matter because we're really not going to push it like globally on the platform. But now that they have to do that, I think it has to hit a certain standard.
Yeah, I wonder if initially that was sort of post-production, like after the series had been completed and maybe even aired locally, they went back later and polished it as much as they could, like the credits and the structure, maybe some of the editing, things like that. But now I think it's probably there from the start for a lot of them. Maybe they still do that with some of the lower budget stuff or the new countries that they discover that have good content. They'd go back and they do a better job now of sort of fixing it afterwards. But I'll bet just right up front. And like you said, it's cheaper probably to do now. You just do it in software.
How do you think it's affected the remake market or this idea of having to do a remake of a show? Like I just mentioned, the original Killing versus a remake on AMC. I wonder if now the idea of having to do remakes is not as important anymore because you can just buy the original property at a cheaper rate and then have, great voice actors that dub it in whatever language, and then you distribute that. So you're not worried about, oh, we're going to do a remake for an American audience. You just have the original in Danish or Swedish or Spanish and then just air it and have it dubbed.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would suppose there's a decision tree for this that is changed by the current setup, like the variables you're saying, but also things like, where do we want this to be big? Like what countries? And are people in that country generally receptive to the cultural elements that differ? So for example, let's go back to The Killing because I'm kind of curious. And you give me a little bit more of a hint about how a killing in a high school could have political, like adult world ramifications, right? Can you give me any kind of clues there that might reveal some cultural differences between Denmark and the United States?
It deals with someone who's a candidate for mayor and how one of the cars that is part of his campaign is stolen, and that's by the killer. So there's a lot of talk about Danish politics that really, in my mind, doesn't really translate that well and the importance of it. So for instance, he's the head of an immigration or refugee program in Denmark that tries to keep, young refugees or people of color off the streets, right? And this is a big, I guess, like a hot button topic in Denmark.
Sure.
Which may not transfer directly for an American audience. You understand what's going on, but the importance of it isn't there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's exactly the point I was trying to make. So go back to our hypothetical decision tree about whether or not you should make a remake. That would be a huge factor. Are there elements of the show that are necessary to the plot and the impact that wouldn't necessarily translate well to an American audience? So if the answer is yes, then you remake it, right? Mm-hmm. You rewrite those elements and shoot an American version or a British version or whatever, some other country. Same thing if you were going from any market to any other market. So if it's like a U.S. show, The Office, and you want to make a version of it for Japan, can you just translate that and would it still be a hit? And is it worth doing your own version? I think part of that decision tree has to do with what you're saying. Like, are there cultural elements that don't translate as well?
I wonder if it's by genre too. Something like comedy really doesn't translate well, right?
Good example.
But something like drama or a thriller of this type translates pretty well. The political landscape, though, is something that I think can translate if the series itself has enough backstory around what's happening. Like, I don't need to know the intricacy of the politics in Denmark to understand what's happening and follow along. But to your point, if you did remake it using the American political system, it would connect a lot more, I think, with an American audience. I guess you have to weigh whether that's going to be such a huge factor in the overall enjoyment or the ratings or the amount of people that you get to watch that series. That's an interesting question, though, because it's very expensive.
Yeah, I mean, it's a risk. Remember, if you're an executive making these decisions, you're looking at a lot of different scripts and you're dealing with a lot of different show creators and you're trying to figure out what will get you an audience. And remakes are great because they guarantee you a certain audience anyway, right? You have some publicity pre-existing, and the fact that you can say it was based on or a remake of an award-winning or very popular series. Like, what was that one? The Dark? That's huge on Netflix. German, right? Yeah, hugely popular. I started the first episode and I stopped it about pretty close to the end because I got tired of reading the screen. And I'm sure there's a dubbed version now and all this kind of stuff, but I just couldn't quite get into it. But it's hugely popular. So for that one, it would seem like the benefits you get of existing word of mouth would be huge. So you could do an American remake, right? Maybe just give it some time.
Yeah, you're right. I think there's so many different factors that an executive at a network is dealing with in terms of figuring out whether or not it's worth the risk. How do you test it? How do you market something like that? And how much of a rewrite do you need?
Right.
I was just reading the description here for The Killing on AMC, and the first line says, based in part on a popular Danish TV series. So they're kind of stepping away from it in terms of the way they're marketing it as like a completely reimagined take.
I guess based on is somehow less desirable than based on in part.
It's interesting how they use the language.
Absolutely. Well, very good. That sounds pretty interesting overall. I watched Rebel Moon Part 1, the Zack Snyder Netflix Star Wars-ish movie. Have you heard about this? Have you seen this?
Yeah. And let me ask you, I heard it was pretty panned overall. Is it as bad as people said it was, or?
No, it might be a little bit worse than that. It is not a good film. I do not recommend it. I thought it would be fun to have a couple drinks and make fun of it with a friend. I mean, there's some great moments where the dialogue is so bad and there are long pauses to insert jokes that I think it would be perfect for Mystery Science Theater someday.
Ooh,
they can
bad.
rip it a new one. Absolutely. It is hard to get through. Like, I don't know if I didn't have enough to drink or what, but it's pretty laughable. I don't know what your opinion is on Zack Snyder. I am less and less of a fan with every movie that he releases. I think part of the problem here is, like George Lucas used to be, Zack Snyder thinks he can write dialogue. And I don't think he can write dialogue. In fact, I don't think he can do dialogue or story. I don't think he understands character arcs. I don't think he understands just characterization in general. I think plotting escapes him beyond the most rudimentary bits of that or elements of that. His visuals are a matter of opinion, but I think that's his strength. But honestly, it's barely at the level of like 1990s peak music videos. It's really bad. I mean, it's awful. So this wraps up part 2 of Rebel Moon, wraps up his deal with Netflix. He had a first look deal that started with Army of the Dead, and Rebel Moon Part 2, the Scar Giver, whatever it's called, is the end of that. So I don't know what's going to happen with him next, but I think an easy solution for him to get his career back on track would really just be to partner with good writers, just to accept that, hey, he's not that great at characterization and plotting, despite the whole DC universe, what is it, DCEU or whatever it was called, his attempt at Batman, Superman. I think he kind of got a big head and thought he could write and create this whole universe and do all this stuff. And I just don't think he's got that ability. So if he partners with people who have it, I think he'd get his career back on track.
Interesting. I put him in the same bucket as Michael Bay.
Yeah. I think Bay is slightly better, even though I hate his movies more. I think he's a little bit better at some of these elements, or else he utilizes teamwork better. But yeah, I think you're right, and their careers are both on a downturn.
Yeah, I think it's rare to have someone who is great in every single area when it comes to filmmaking, especially when they have to be in charge of so many different aspects of a film, like the visuals. Typically when you have someone who's an expert in special effects, they're not known for their incredible dialogue, but they get fantastic screenwriters, Yeah. And that's such a great combo,
Yep.
You don't really have like a lot of James Camerons out there in Hollywood,
Right.
What's his name? Why don't I remember his name? Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson's out there, who are so great at directing, but also great writers and understand the material so well.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it takes a big ego to succeed, talk a big game and take on big projects and not be afraid to fail. And so maybe that's why some of these directors rise to the top. But I think most of them need strong executive producers that they can work closely with, who can say to them, hey, here's somebody to go over the story and the script, and here's somebody who can help you with this part and that part, and this person's great, and get these directors to fill in the gaps. Like I just don't think it's realistic to assume that you're just great in all these areas. I think Spielberg might be somebody who is a good mix. I think sometimes he can handle everything or elements of everything, but he also works pretty closely with people who do certain pieces of it well. And I think that's what it takes. Like, I just, if you think of yourself as good at everything, you're going to fail.
Yeah, like Spielberg partners up with Steven Zaillian, I think it is, who did Schindler's List. And I mean, he just is a phenomenal writer in his own right. So, but yeah, I think it's hard to strike that balance. And I think it makes sense though, right? If you've been obsessed with visuals your entire life as a special effects person, let's say,
yeah,
you haven't devoted the time into the writing that someone who, maybe started out as a writer and then started figuring out how these, special effects work into their film. They have much more of a vision, it feels like.
Yeah.
Well,
and also you can be really good at something and still get a better result overall if you work with others closely, right? So, if you and I put together a film, maybe I'm doing a lot of the plotting and the writing, and maybe you're doing the visuals and the direction, things like that. But it would behoove both of us to take advantage of really anyone's input who's good, and to be flexible and open and kind of rethink and restructure. And, it's just like there's a trend in directing now where a lot of films are directed by two people. Now that I think has been the case for a long time, but in terms of credit, it wasn't allowed and stuff like that. And they changed that policy. So now it's more open. But I think it yields some of the best complicated films. If you're making a simple film, it's easier, I think, for one person to oversee a lot of it. But for these big budget movies with a lot of characters and special effects and high drama, or they're shooting the sequel back to back or whatever, I think it makes a lot more sense to have two directors who have worked well together for years. I think Marvel took advantage of that for a while, or Disney did for the MCU. The Russo brothers cranked out some of the best properties because the MCU, the characters had gotten too big. It was too much going on. It was too hard for one person to do it. So I think it's better if you recognize that, hey, even if I'm smart and capable, I benefit from working extremely closely with other smart, capable people.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know,
Absolutely.
Maybe Zack Snyder knows that and he just hasn't lucked into the right people. Maybe he's getting bad advice. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he just needed some time to watch his own films and realize where the problems are. But this is not a good movie. There really isn't any, I think, defense of this film other than excuses.
Have you heard of that Disney Plus, The Acolyte?
Yeah.
That's coming out?
Yeah.
What's that all about?
It's a streaming series set in the Star Wars universe, but it's set before anything previously put out there. So it's got Carrie-Anne Moss as a Jedi. So these are, originally it was going to be the very early days, but now I think it's just pre-Phantom Menace.
I think she's a very good actress.
Yeah, she was great in the MCU. She was in... what's it called? Jessica Jones. She was really good in that.
Oh, that's right. That was a good show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, had a lot of great stuff in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually been a lot of talk lately about what they're going to do with the Netflix shows from the MCU. So Daredevil was the first one that they started to bring back. And then there was Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and Jessica Jones. And then they all were together for the Defenders. And they increasingly are bringing more of the content of the Daredevil series into the current MCU as canon. So we'll see if that pulls Jessica Jones or Luke Cage or any of the other stuff into it. So I don't know. I think they're trying to figure out how to navigate the fact that there is this existing version of these characters that people really like without wholesale just swallowing all of it and making it part of the MCU. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But she could be back, is my point.
They're all great shows, except I didn't really enjoy Iron Fist as much.
Yeah, you're the only one.
Yeah,
which killed me because I loved Iron Fist when I was a kid, especially the costume, which I think was one of the best parts of the character. And then, of course, they just didn't do the costume in the show, which was really stupid because honestly, the biggest problem I think with the show was that the main actor wasn't particularly skilled. And that is in the martial arts. And that is what defines that character in a lot of ways. So an easy fix for that is to use the costume because the costume has a mask.
Just didn't find it very charismatic.
I think that's part of the problem.
In general.
Again, full face mask. It's not just his face, it's his whole head. The mask is supposed to cover his whole head, right? Yeah, exactly.
I think you just solved all of Hollywood.
Exactly.
Every movie in Hollywood that's a bomb, let's actually remake it. Or based in part in.
It's an easy
every
fix.
bomb.
I don't know why they didn't do it. I would do it if they said, all right, we got to pull all the Netflix shows into the MCU. I'd be like, great, go get the same actor. I can do this. I'm just going to slap a mask on him.
Put a mask on him.
He's going to take it off every so often. And maybe just stand in the background, and then he's going to put it back on. And we'll hire some. Yeah. Oh yeah.
With very obvious cuts too.
Yeah, like the stunt actor will be like 6'4" or whatever.
It's like
an African American guy with like huge muscles.
He jumps off a box and you just switch him out.
Yeah, that's an easy fix. All right. So I did want to briefly ask you one more thing before we talk about Fallout. So I know you're a huge fan and spokesperson for Netflix, but there's something that's really been bothering me. They recently came out during one of the big conventions where streaming services court advertisers. And of course, they're all now doubled down on getting ads, right? So there are ad-supported tiers for most of the streaming channels. But I think you can expect, if you're listening to this, that to increase dramatically. The ad-supported tiers are going to be the same price, maybe even a little cheaper than they are presently. They're going to have more ads, and the tiers with fewer ads are going to be more and more expensive. So I think, what is it? Presently with Netflix, it's maybe like $6.99 a month for the ad-supported tier, something like that. I think pretty soon it's going to be, if you don't want ads, it's going to be like $18 a month, and that's for the standard. And if you want the premium for, 2 screens, it's going to be like $26 a month because they want ads. Netflix just announced that they have 500 million viewers worldwide. They are moving back into live sports. Chasing those ad dollars. Ads are getting out of control on Amazon. They're increasing ads dramatically. Same with all of them, right? Even Paramount, which hasn't really had a lot of ads, has started adding them in. I've noticed more and more, even though often they're skippable. So that is the current phase that we're moving into, is going to be ad heavy, right? And if you don't like that, maybe we should do an episode where we talk about other forms of entertainment. Because that is coming. Exactly. Board games.
Part
right? We're going to do a podcast on board games. So anyway, my question to you is this. Do you think the average Netflix show is 2-second screen to support advertising? Yeah. So, when I say 2-second screen, I mean, it doesn't really hold your attention. Right? It becomes like you get your phone out, right? The Netflix show becomes the second screen that you're paying attention to.
Oh, I see what you mean.
We talked about the latest Indiana Jones movie. And one of the things I said was I actually had to stop the film and back up to get some exposition because I had taken my phone out, something I'd literally never done in an Indiana Jones movie. When I watch Netflix, it's almost like I feel this calling or this like gravitational pull with my cell phone, and I don't even notice it happening. It's just something about Netflix shows where, in general, they're re-explaining something, or it's been too long since anything really significant to the story has happened, or everything is just so surface level that I don't feel like I need to pay attention. And I think that's partially intentional. I think that's how they get their viewer numbers so high, is that it's not very demanding, so you don't turn it off.
That's a really, really fascinating question, because there are a few things going on. I think, to answer your first, do I think it's too much of a second screen? I think it's going in that direction because I think a lot of people just can't handle this idea going back to commercials. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think they're really not paying attention, first of all, when the commercials are on, and they'll be going to their phone. And the other question that I would have about that scenario is, how are these brands actually going to measure any attention that they're getting? So Netflix is reporting, okay, let's say you spent $100,000 on advertisement during this particular television show or movie. How are you going to know what type of attention you got? When television was, it still is, but ad-supported television, you get a lot of eyeballs on those ads. You know, let's say 20, 25 years ago, people would remember the ads, talk about the ads, but now you're just saturated, right, with advertising. So I think the actual value that the advertiser's getting out of those ads is much less. But then you have another problem, that you can't bombard the viewer with more advertising. So it's this constant battle between like advertising and these networks. Like, they want to make money off advertising. They want to buy new programming. They want to buy new assets for the network itself. But then where does it come a time where you start losing subscribers in general, whether it's ad support, because it's ad supported? And will advertisers start to realize that maybe this isn't the most effective form of advertising in general? You know what I mean? And I think they're going to have to start even doing more of a reshaping of shows in order to catch you on the cliffhangers that traditional, like let's say a traditional sitcom or drama on network TV would have. But then it just becomes network TV part 2, which I think is where it's headed now.
Yeah, that's exactly what they want, I think, whether they realize it or not. And I'm really glad you went there, because this is exactly where I wanted the conversation to go. I think this is a very short-sighted strategy for a lot of reasons. And I think hashtag 2-second screen is a great hashtag to slap on any kind of social media comments about a lot of these shows. You know, they are just too background. They are like too slow or too thin. There's too much repetition. Like there's just not enough happening fast enough to really hold your attention. And I think there are two main problems with that. One is it's a waste of advertising. You know, they just keep cramming ads in there, but nobody's really paying attention, and the show doesn't make an impression. So the movie doesn't make an impression either. So the advertising doesn't make an impression, right? I think the argument that Netflix would make is, hey, look at these numbers. 500 million people are running this show and quote unquote saw your ad. But I think there's a huge difference between they had Netflix on and they learned about your product or were formed an impression of your product. I think that's completely different, and they're not measuring that. And I think Netflix has very sneakily been making their shows 2-second screen so that people are just like, yeah, I don't know, I just leave Netflix on and I'm on my phone, right? So Netflix can pretend like they have 500 million people who are sitting there staring at the screen, absorbing everything, paying attention. So one problem with that is eventually there'll be blowback, right? Advertisers will realize, yeah, 500 million viewers on Netflix isn't really worth the same as, say, 100 million on some other series or channel that isn't a second screen. Right? The audience is hanging on everything that happens. And when a commercial pops up, they were riveted. So they absorb at least the first half of that commercial really clearly. Whereas on Netflix, they don't even notice that a commercial break happened. So I think that's going to catch up with them. But also, you're not really building legacy intellectual properties. Netflix, in my opinion, a lot of those shows, because they're so second screen, they fall into the background of your memory. Right? It's not like when you think back to what was on ABC or Fox and you're like, oh man, I loved X-Files, and that's like a meaningful intellectual property. I think back over what I've seen on Netflix and I'm like, the only stuff I can really remember is like some of the foreign stuff and some of the stuff that was atypical for Netflix. Everything else is just sort of like, oh yeah, that's right, I did watch that.
Yeah, it's going to be really fascinating to see which way this all goes. I was listening to Gary Vee talk about advertising in general and how he was in a car going through the Lincoln Tunnel and there was traffic and he saw there was a bunch of billboard space that was kind of empty. And he's like, oh, maybe I should invest in that because we're all stopped here.
Right.
But then he got to thinking, and he said to himself, a while back, let's say 20 years ago or something, this would have been very, very, very valuable advertising space. But now, because of the mobile phone,
Right.
he notices that people, when they're stuck in traffic, will just start browsing their phone.
Right.
So then he started thinking about this idea of why social media advertising is much more effective. Because when you're scrolling through your feed, you literally have no idea whether you're going to get a friend's post or an ad. And in terms of gaining attention for a product or service, where is there more value? One, the actual advertising benefit is baked into the feed, into the design of the product. The other one, you're just rolling the dice and you're having a billboard company tell you, okay, that's $40,000 a month, but there's absolutely no tracking of that particular piece of content. When on social media, you can just click through and buy a product, or you can count the actual click, or actually know that actually was scrolled through. The person did see it. So I kind of see that the same way as what we're talking about here with Netflix. Netflix has become a billboard.
You're exactly right. They did it, I think, intentionally, because it allows them to fool organizations like Nielsen, right? SAG-AFTRA, part of their deal last year was they get access to independent data. Like when they have calculations based on, or that determine compensation based on viewership. And they were reliant on Netflix, for example, to tell them this is how many people watched it. But of course, that gives Netflix an unacceptable level of control where they can say, well, we're not really counting these people, or we only count it certain ways or whatever. And so you made half as much as you thought you made. So Nielsen now is tracking that, and that data is more important than it was financially. But I've been in Nielsen House. They do not at all track whether I was paying attention, just whether or not I was watching a particular channel or that it was on. I said I was watching, but I often wasn't even in the room. So there were a few shows that I wanted to support, and I would just set up my DVR or my TV to turn on when I wasn't there, so that that show would look like it got, however many people I represented, my household represented at that time. I wasn't even in the house. I wasn't even home, and it was getting credit for viewers. So anyway, I think Netflix figured this out a while ago, and they decided if they intentionally make their shows less attention getting, that people will just pull out their phones and they will leave Netflix on.
Yeah, you may be right about that. And also it makes me think about just this idea of buying as many properties as you possibly can at a very discounted rate. Let's say they're foreign shows, to be able to sell advertising space. So you're basically buying thousands of billboards.
Yep.
Blank billboards that you now advertise on.
Yep.
Which is a fascinating way to look at it. And when you couple that with amazing data on the back end of actual viewer data, you can really be smart about how you sell these properties and where you put these ads as well. So it's a win-win for Netflix. But at the end of the day, it can definitely backfire, because an advertiser can say, well, where's the trackability here?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if I had a huge company that had been around for decades, I would take a product that I released at least 3 years ago, maybe 4 or 5, that had pretty consistent results, like, in terms of how many units we were moving or whatever. And then I would just do ads on one streaming platform, and I would pay a decent amount to have it be present in the shows they recommended, things like that. And then I would look and see exactly how much it impacted the numbers. I wouldn't advertise it anywhere else. And I would run that for maybe 2 or 3 years, just advertise, maybe just on Netflix, just for the shows that they say fit, the audience that we're looking for, and then the demographic, and then just see, like, what's it really worth for every dollar I spend on these ads in Netflix? How does that translate into sales, for example? And it might be, it's all over social media and blah, blah, blah. But in terms of sales, the numbers are the same, right? Or it's a small uptick and then it goes back down And it averages out to no improvement over 3 years, right? Or no increase in sales. So I'd be very curious to see that. I just, if I owned a big company, that would be hugely helpful to me. Then I could make really smart decisions about where to put my advertising dollars going forward. But I think that the whole system is designed to hide this exact kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also on top of that, why wouldn't you just add a call to action to the ads that are running on something like Netflix? It would help so much. A promo code, a QR code, something. I wonder if there's something in their contract that they can't do it for whatever reason on an ad, because that's one of the easiest ways to actually know if they're converting on that particular piece of advertising, would be to use some kind of incentive, a discount incentive, a promo code, a free giveaway incentive, something.
Yeah.
But I never see it.
Right.
It's almost like,
It's a good point.
a lot of these brands are just using it for just general reach. Like we're on Netflix. We're just getting our name out there, because they're not going to be able to do a one-to-one tracking. But at least they'd have a chance.
But they could. If you were GE and you're selling dishwashers and you have a particular model that you've had out for a couple of years and it sells all right, but you think it could be doing better, and you ask Netflix and they say, sure, we recommend this show and that show, and here's the cost for those kind of ads. And then you say, great, I'm going to throw a promo code in there. And then say 2 years later or 3 years later, you take a look at how many people use that promo code, bought the product, and didn't return it. Because it's easy for Netflix to game that, right? So you just take a look, like, what does that translate into? And I think people would be shocked, I think, at how few sales actually stuck, where it was trackable and it went right back to these 50 or 500 million viewers worldwide, So anyway, I think it's interesting. I think hashtag 2-second screen is a legitimate criticism now of a lot of these streaming shows. And I think in these streaming movies, and I think it's a good one to get out there, because it makes the point, like, if you're going to make something, make it memorable, make it watchable, make it interesting, make it engaging, especially if you're going to slap an ad in there.
And we'll see how this all pans out.
Yeah.
Because I think there's going to be a lot of ad fatigue over time. And there are more and more streaming options available. And I'm going to add YouTube to the mix. YouTube is such a huge player in people's attention now, in general, that it used to be something that you just look at on your computer.
Right.
And then your mobile phone. But now televisions with that app on it, it's a legitimate competitor to a lot of these streaming services. And since they're varying the content so much between more long-form content, more short-form content, it really fits into your lifestyle much better, I would argue, than something like Netflix, which is basically, half hour or 40 minutes, 60-minute show, or a long-form movie.
Yeah.
If you say to yourself, okay, I've got 15 minutes to kill, you're not going to really want to get into a full show on Netflix or a movie. You'll say, okay, I'm going to watch this particular travel show or whatever interests you on YouTube and move on with my day. It just fits better. And there's a lot more options in terms of programming. But I think when people really make that mindset shift into YouTube, not just being YouTube video clip platform, but YouTube entertainment platform, that's when I think a lot of streamers have to worry.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of YouTube is not 2-second screen, right? It is attention bite-sized in a way. And also you're specifically seeking that out. So you might jump around, but you're probably not going to watch YouTube and then pull out your phone, whether you're watching it on whatever device you're on, right? I mean, you might have it running up in the corner while you do something else on your phone, but I think far less often that's the case presently. Now, there are some examples where I'm sure that's not true, but I think that is generally the case. And at the very least, the viewer can choose, do they want something that's very engaging, or do they want something that's more second screen? Whereas with Netflix, you're not able to consciously make that choice. And I think that's a real problem. Netflix is 2-second screen right now.
This idea that you can have educational entertainment content too, I think is another big factor. Where someone watching YouTube, you could go down the rabbit hole of entertainment, but it has so many educational options where people don't feel guilty watching it. Like, the idea of Netflix binging is demonized, like, oh, you're just wasting your time. I think the fact that YouTube gives you those kind of educational, very granular options in terms of where you can actually spend your attention, your time, makes it a really viable opponent to a lot of just purely entertainment streaming as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think YouTube is increasingly a better subscription option presently than channels like Amazon Prime, which I am going to pick on today, even though it was the host to the subject of our episode, Fallout, which was excellent. I think Amazon Prime has fallen into the bad neighborhood of commercials. Fallout was originally presented. The first 2 episodes, I think, were commercial free. And then they did an opening commercial that was like a couple of minutes long, and then no commercials during the episode. But shortly after we gave it a positive review last time, Amazon announced they were going to put a ton of commercials into Fallout. So not great, and it may be too late to watch it because now it's full of commercials. However, it is a good show. So Fallout, the TV series 2024, notably directed by Jonathan Nolan, who did the first 3 episodes and I think had a lot of input in the remaining episodes. And cast Ella Purnell, who I mentioned before, I think is a real breakout in this series. Walton Goggins, Kyle MacLachlan, Aaron Moten has a pretty big role in this. The budget, $153 million, huge. Another big Amazon swing, right? Right up there with their Lord of the Rings series, which didn't do very well. But at $153 million, this is one of the most expensive streaming series for just one season that's been out there. Just briefly, it's based on the game series Fallout, which started in 1997. That was Fallout number 1. There have been 11 total games. Most recently, it was a mobile game from 2019. There's a rumored PC game or a computer game coming out, but no date on when that would drop. So the property is owned by Bethesda, and they're obviously making a ton of money off of this. How about a brief summary of the plot of the series here? What do you got for me?
So it's an apocalyptic, futuristic, kind of like a apocalypse. Let me start over because there's just so much going on in this one. It's really tough to summarize.
All right, let me help you out. All right, hold on. The year is 2077.
There's been a nuclear disaster. It's 219 some odd years in the future.
2296.
The world's still recovering. There's the remaining humans are underground in several different vaults where they've created their own society.
Yep.
And they're basically the privileged class. And there's also a class of humans that live above ground, and they're living really horribly, as you would imagine, kind of scrounging for resources, etc. The protagonist, Lucy, is living an idealized life. There's an incident that happens that forces her to come up to the surface. While she's on the surface, she meets a cast of characters who are all looking to survive, and they all have different motivations for what they're doing and their interactions with her. There's the ghoul, who is a character who's really interesting because he's from 200 years in the past, or more than 200 years in the past, but he's still alive for some reason, which we find out later on. He's on a specific mission I'm not going to get into. There's Maximus, who is from the Steel Knights, or the Knights of Steel, and they're an organization that's a paramilitary group who is looking to bring back old technology. So basically, everyone's vying for a specific goal, and she's, in the incident that I'm alluding to from the beginning of the show, is she's looking for her father, who's been kidnapped by a rebel group. So eventually she ends up meeting up with Maximus, who's part of this Knights of Steel. They run into the ghoul, who has his own motivations, and Yeah, I guess that's basically where plot goes in the future world. But then there's also the past before this fallout happened. So we're tracing the origins of vault tech, the creation of the vault, why this is happening. It's basically through the eyes of the ghoul, but the ghoul before he was the ghoul.
That is one of the interesting elements of the show. Yeah, that was good. It's a classic hero's journey.
It's a tricky one.
It's Wizard of Oz. The only difference is it's Wizard of Oz if they developed the Tin Man and the lion a little bit more. So if I redid Wizard of Oz, which they seem to do about every 5 or 7 years now, or maybe it's once a decade. What do you think? Once a decade? Is that how often we get a Wizard of Oz
Maybe
remake?
Once a decade.
Yeah, give or take. So anyway, let's say in what do we do in 2 or 3 years? If they came to me and said, hey, make a Wizard of Oz, I would just use this as a template because I think that's what they did, is they kind of used that as a template. So you have your Dorothy character who grew up in the shelter in a very idyllic situation, even though living underground, right? And then she goes to Oz, which in this case is the Earth after not just the Great War of 2077, but also some other skirmishes and local wars that have happened since. So it's kind of a mess and full of colorful characters who have been irradiated and so on and so forth. And then she meets her companions, the Tin Man, who, in this case, they developed a lot more. That's Maximus, and he's on his own arc of, basically realizing that the cult that he's a part of is not as great as he thought, and then finding his own way, his own destiny. And you have the Cowardly Lion, I suppose, which would be Walton Goggins' character maybe, except in this particular case, he's also more developed. And his character has its own journey where he overcomes, instead of cowardice, it's like his bitterness at losing his family and so on and so forth. So pretty standard storytelling stuff, but it was done very well. And it was told a little bit out of sequence with some time jumps, so you get a little bit of that Lost, remember TV show, that kind of Lost benefit where there's a lot of mystery boxes and you're sort of jumping around. But it's basically at the core, I think, Wizard of Oz. So what'd you think? Did you like it?
Loved it. I thought it was so well done. I thought the characters, the acting was so strong. The story was so well told. I butchered the summary because there's just so much going on in that show in terms of timeline, jumping between the timelines. The reveals in the show are fantastic. There's always something new and interesting to kind of learn about the world, which I really love. There's certain shows where they reveal so much in the beginning that it doesn't leave a lot of mystery later on. It's just the world is set. We learned all about it. It's very linear. This had none of that. It was like a Pandora's box, just continuously offering surprises, twists and turns, and such really well-drawn characters. I just have to keep going back to that because there wasn't a cookie cutter character in it, really. Even the supporting characters, there was so much nuance in the performance. There was so much well thought out and well drawn out backstory from each of them that, I was really hooked.
Yeah. Well, Matt and I were observing that there really were no bad episodes. Did you feel that way when you watched it?
No, I would definitely agree. All the episodes, I feel there wasn't a throwaway episode in the bunch. There was always something to learn in each one of the episodes. That's what I was alluding to before. It's just so tightly written, the right cliffhangers at the right moments to keep you drawn in the entire time, revealing really important pieces of information. And really the scenes themselves there aren't really any throwaway scenes either. Like everything builds really well.
I referred to Walton Goggins' character as the Cowardly Lion, but I think he's the Scarecrow. I think that works better.
Yeah, I really like your comparison to the Wizard of Oz. I think that works really well.
Yeah, it's just Wizard of Oz done in sort of a modern style where you develop the characters more. And it's a series, not a film. So you'd have to do that just to fill time, right? If Dorothy was just or I should say if Lucy was just wandering around, then there would be boring episodes. There would be chunks that were just sort of like filler. You know, she had to get from A to B, so, you know, that was this episode, I guess. And something kind of interesting happened briefly, but it's not relevant to the whole story. So they cut all that, and instead they developed these other characters, so you get more of the Tin Man and the Scarecrow. And it works. It works great. There was even a dog.
There was a great dog. I think it's a story. I mean, I've never played the video games, so I can't compare it to the video games. Have you played them?
I played Fallout 76 from 2018, and people tell me that's not the best one. I played maybe like 5 or 6 hours of it, maybe more. It's hard to remember. Maybe not that much. Somewhere in that ballpark. It's fine. It's good. It's just a standard RPG. It has a lot of cool elements to it. It was definitely well done. It just got a little bit much. Like, I think maybe because I hadn't played previous games, some of the added complexity that players who had may have wanted, to me, felt like a bit much to kind of manage, and it stopped being as fun, and it felt more like work. Like I was sort of calculating things and trying to remember details and so on and so forth. And I was like, I can go do my job if I want to work and make money. I don't really need to apply myself so much to this. So I kind of let it drift off and played something else. But it's not a bad game, certainly high quality. I think some of the other ones, though, are hugely popular. I think the Fallout New Vegas, maybe was what it was called. I think that one was massively popular, even though it's a little bit older now. The most recent game being the mobile game. I did download that and play it for a few minutes, but just didn't grab me. It's a disturbing trend in games where they go from these super big budget, quadruple A, worldwide release games, and they pivot to doing sequels on like iOS or whatever. Like, ugh. No, thank you.
Yeah, that's such a weird thing to do, right? It's just kind of just capitalizing on the name.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a much cheaper development process, and you can always update it more easily and more quickly, and you can make a casual game for a lot less difficulty than these kinds of masterpieces that they put out. But you don't build an intellectual property that way. I think, Angry Birds is sort of an exception to that, where you have a very simple game and they did build an IP, but I would say the difference between Angry Birds and Fallout is probably billions of dollars over the lifetime of the property, I would guess.
Yeah, I'd say. Let me ask you something. What did you think about the way they handled that alternative or alternate timeline of America?
Yeah.
I thought that was so cool. I heard on an interview they were talking about how in their timeline there was no Vietnam, there was no counterculture movement, and it's this idea of Vietnam or the counterculture movement never existed. So you're stuck in an Eisenhower era that's technologically more advanced, obviously, than what that era was.
Well, it's interesting because of the politics around that now. This idea of making America great again is sort of, you could interpret, consistent with this alternate reality. You know, it's sort of like, what if America was never not great? If you follow that path, if you follow that line of thinking, then America continues to be strong. And even though the culture sort of integrated and became more diverse, they sort of stuck with some of these ideals that were popular in that era. And that ultimately led to a war with China, a nuclear war. So I would say it's an interesting commentary from that standpoint. I don't know how realistic it is. I don't know. You know, I think everybody's entitled to their own opinion about how things would develop. But I think it's kind of a neat idea. I don't know. What's your reaction?
I felt it was really well done. I think in terms of capturing advancements, but keeping those advancements very much grounded in the 1950s. You know, it's like a modernized technology, but where you're not using, let's say, plastic in silicon chips, but it's held in this transistor era. And how far could you push that era into a new technology now? And I think they did such a good job of that, like the green screen computers and like those, what are those wrist modules or like those wrist devices kind of that they're using that are like the iPhone.
Yeah.
But they're like, look like tanks on your arm. I thought that was really, really clever and really well done, showing that technology advanced, but using what was available in the 1950s. It's almost like you were stuck in time using steel and wood to create like supercomputers.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, we talked about this as well in Three Body Problem, because in the novel series, that is a challenge that humans face, where they need to develop technology, but they can't advance technologically into there aren't going to be any major breakthroughs in understanding the fundamental nature of how the universe works. And so they have to achieve their goals and protect themselves from the invasion using developed technology from the present. So yeah, I mean, it's a similar idea in that respect, and I think a really interesting one. Culture and technology being as tied as they are, as we've also discussed previously. We don't spend a lot of time talking about whatever the title of the episode is. Have you ever noticed that?
A little bit. I'm sure the audience has noticed too. But we gone some interesting tangents though, so stay tuned because we don't know what we're going to talk about next. And that's a big plus.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, every now and then I think maybe we should put chapter breaks in so somebody who just wants to hear about Fallout can just jump to that. But then most of the good content, I think, is in other chapters. And I'm really not going to take the time to label all that stuff and even try to make sense of it. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of these ideas that are popping up more and more in fiction are things that you and I have discussed either in other projects or just in our own discussions about culture and technology and business. So, yeah, I always love to see somebody develop that further and do a take on it.
Yeah, I think the idea of an alternate timeline in general is great fodder for television. There's so many great ways you can go with it and still ground it in the reality of certain historical events and have those events trigger different events subsequently that we're not familiar with. So you can ground it in reality, but have it be very much something that's whimsical or made up or fantastical. Yeah. I really love those types of shows.
Well, as I've said before also in other episodes, good science fiction and good fantasy is really just using extreme situations to talk about people alive today, right? To make points about humanity and culture and, who we are in the present. So that's what this does. I think this show does a great job talking about who humans are in the present and who, different cultures, different perspectives, how we get along, how we don't get along, where we're headed as a species, where we're headed as a people, things like that. Even though it's set in 2296, or different time periods, right? And what seemed like very unrelatable extreme circumstances. It's not, right? It's all just a very interesting, creative way to talk about people today. And so I think it does a great job of that. And it's very engrossing, holds attention well. This is the opposite of being second screen, right? I don't think you would pull your phone out the whole time or even be tempted to.
Yeah, I think to your point, this idea that we really enjoy the three-body problem because it's so set in how humans react when they're facing really difficult circumstances. And this show does an excellent job of that.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, humans don't change too much. The
Right.
technology around them changes, but their motivations, desires, fears, they don't change.
Yeah.
So when a show really captures this fantasy world, but then grounds it in things that are so familiar, like human nature and the human experience, it really captivates.
Yeah. Well, I think people forget, if you go back to the oldest stories from humanity, right? Like the ancient myths and stories about characters that were only passed on through an oral tradition, you see the same human traits. You see the same human emotions, same human mistakes, the same desires, the same types of relationships, right? People lose sight of how constant these things are. And yes, this series has the window dressing of a lot of very seemingly extreme or unique circumstances, but it's not, right? At the root of all of it are people. And this series did a great job of continuing that very long tradition that goes back to the beginning of humanity. And that's unusual, right? And when I say it's Wizard of Oz with some variations because it's a series, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean that as a compliment, because Wizard of Oz is another example of one of those universal stories.
What did you think of the motivations around the Steel Knights, or the Brotherhood of Steel? What did you think they were really, really after? Or at the end of the day, what are they really after?
Yeah, so, I think the series made the point of saying they're after power, but I think what they're after is survival. I think it's a hard world. And one strategy for surviving when things are hard is to create that kind of cult-like singularity of purpose, right? To create a cohesive culture around extreme ideas, right? It separates you, it binds you together, it insulates you, and it allows for cooperation. Yes, there are a lot of problems. It can become very corrupt, and I don't even need to go through all the reasons why that is a risky proposition. But the alternative can be everybody just starves to death, right? So in a post-apocalyptic world, or when humans are under a lot of stress, when they form a group like that, it can be extremely effective, right? They become a team, and they can accomplish way more, especially around survival, than a lot of the characters, for example, we saw who just lived on like a farmstead, sort of quote unquote, in the middle of nowhere. And you could see that their death, whether they live or die another day, seemed like as much chance as anything. Whereas this Brotherhood of Steel, if that's what they were called, I don't remember, they were likely to survive. They could anticipate a meal a week from now, a month from now. They could anticipate somebody watching out for their back. Are there downsides? Again, yes, and there are risks, but I think this show illustrated that it's a better alternative than being on your own.
I really liked the way they were so mysterious especially the portrayal of that leader. I think it was great. It really had that kind of Game of Thrones vibe to me.
Yeah.
What was the nature of the whole idea behind Reclamation Day? Did they go into who actually came up with the idea? Are we supposed to assume that it was Vault-Tec who kind of created that rumor about going back to like the surface of Earth?
Yeah, I think that was part of the story that the people who at least ran the vaults that we were familiar with were given. It was like part of the control. It was like a control mechanism kind of a thing. I don't know. Or maybe not. Maybe they all really believed it. It wasn't clear to me. I know there's a lot left in this series. It's a little hard sometimes to talk about story when you talk about a series, when you only have seen one season and there's more coming. So maybe that'll become a bigger focus down the road. Did anything about it stand out to you?
It almost seemed religious to me, like the second coming of Jesus. But, that the people are populating the earth. They're like Noah's Ark, and that it was really simple for them to kind of grasp that idea. So it had this religious undertone for me.
Yeah, that's an excellent observation. Yeah, there was a lot about the nature of society that they could play around with, sex and marriage and, homes, family, right? Community. And I think religion, definitely. Yeah.
This perversion of power, that was a really great point that they made around the Vault-Tec people and that round table that they had put together, and how they justified it. Almost reminded me of, the most evil dictatorships and how they justify basing a cleansing of a country or of Earth, so they can start over because it's too polluted, but they're the ones who have polluted it.
Yeah.
I thought that was very fascinating.
Yeah. So what would you like to see out of season 2? Any thoughts?
I think the ghoul is so amazing as a character. It's just going to be great to see his search for his family and where that takes him, and how he's led to his family by the Kyle MacLachlan character. I thought that cliffhanger was so great, just to see. It kept it so wide open, but also giving you a kind of a satisfactory conclusion to season 1. I was wondering how they were going to do that without leaving just like a big wide, opening in terms of the plot. But they were able to close some key things and then kind of start anew with season 2. I just really love following his journey. I think he's the best character in the show. What do you think?
Yeah, no, definitely. And actually, we've seen technology in the show now that could have been used to keep his family alive. So there are several ways, based on what we've seen, in which his wife and daughter could still be living.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be curious to see how that plays out.
And the relationship with Lucy and her father. What's going to happen there,
Yeah, that was odd. His character changed so much so quickly. I wish they had done a little bit better job foreshadowing that when he was in the story in the first couple episodes, just giving us a little bit more of a hint that maybe he's not this great guy that we think he is. Because then when his true self is made apparent later, I think it would make more sense, right? Like you kind of want to drop some clues so that people feel like, oh, I could have figured that out, or I could have realized something was up. Whereas instead, at least to me, I felt like they just completely changed the character, and it really wasn't evident. There were no clues earlier.
I wonder if there were clues that we didn't pick up on, or they wanted us to pick up on, and we just didn't.
Yeah.
I would agree with you though. That was pretty abrupt.
Yeah.
Seemed like this nice guy.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got him. He's in a cage.
Right.
And we've got an evil mastermind.
Yeah.
Behind it all, that kidnapped him for no reason.
Yeah.
That was a pretty nice twist, though. I gotta say, that was really good. I thought she was a great actress. She played that part so well.
Absolutely. Very true. Anything else you want out of season 2?
I think I'm just so curious now. There's just so much going on, and I want to see how that energy source is used in season 2.
Oh yeah.
Now that the why do I keep forgetting their name? I should just write it down. The Brotherhood of Steel.
Yeah.
And what they do with it and the power struggle there. That'll be pretty cool to see.
Yeah, it seems like since the Great War, there's been a pattern of rebuilding and then sort of imploding and then rebuilding and imploding. So I think we're due for that again.
Yeah.
Anything else about Fallout?
No, it's just such a great show. I don't even have any criticisms for this one.
No,
which is kind of
just give us more. Keep it coming.
I just want to know what happens.
Right.
Roll out all the seasons.
Yeah.
I'll watch them all at once. I'll binge watch another 3 seasons. Yep. So it was really great.
Yeah. Bottom line, it's a real treat. We intentionally stayed away from spoiling a lot of it, which we normally don't do. So encourage you to watch it if you're looking for something this summer. Any questions for the audience about anything we talked about today?
Is there a way that you would have reimagined the technology, or did you think it was satisfactory the way it was portrayed? This idea that it's kind of like a retro-futuristic technology, was that satisfying, or could it have been kind of heightened in other ways?
Yeah.
Where you see, let's say, more AI type technology in it, like the that kind of floating robot head.
Yeah.
Would you want to see more of that?
Yeah.
Less of that? Because it was kind of peppered through, and I thought it was good, but I wonder if there was another way to kind of use the technology more.
Yeah, absolutely. And on a similar note, would you have preferred that they kept more of the values of that time period, and it was perhaps more of a segregated community, or more consistent in other ways with the values of that time period, like gender roles, things like that, in order to continue those discussions in this context? Or are you comfortable with how that community or that society advanced in some ways socially and interpersonally and culturally, and in other ways not so much? So did you like that balance? Do you think that made sense? Some people might have been offended. Some people might have been disappointed. Some people might have been confused. But a lot of people, I would predict, just predicting the audience reaction, kind of don't really care that much because they enjoyed the show. I'll bet that's a consensus, but we'll see. Write us and let us know.
Yep.
Well, very good. So thank you to the people who made the projects we discussed. Thank you, as always, to the listeners. If you want to reach us, you can find us on social media under Don't Encourage Us, or you can reach us on don'tencourage@gmail.com. Check the show notes for more information. I have been putting together a music playlist, which I will launch on YouTube, probably be out by the time we release this episode, which has all the songs we've talked about. We talked about some songs last episode. So I'm just going to put all that in one ongoing playlist and put it on our YouTube channel. We'll have to think of a good name. Maybe somebody can suggest one. Next time, what do you think? Should we review Dead Heat? Is it time to hit it?
I think it's time.
Okay.
50 episodes in, I think it's time.
So Dead Heat for real next time. All right, everybody.
Yep.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody.